Southwestern Indiana is dotted with small towns where front yards are decorated with American flags and yard signs that read "Proud Union Home" and "Count on Coal." Nearly everyone here is associated with the coal mining industry, or at least knows someone who is.
What we're looking at is a rail loading facility where they bring 120 empty rail cars with 3 engines, and we load approximately 116 tons of coal on each rail car.
John Stacura is the vice president of Solar Sources Underground. His company is a middleman in the coal industry. Each day, its 4 employees load coal from the mines into train cars, where it's then shipped off to nearby power plants. Every year, they load more than 2 million tons of coal. But that's less than half the amount they could be shipping.
Solar Sources has infrastructure and permits in place that we could mine between 5 and 5.2 million tons of coal a year if the contracts were there.
Solar Sources Underground also has a permit to mine the land just west of this facility, but the land is sitting untouched. Stacura says they aren't mining for the same reason they aren't shipping out more coal. There isn't enough demand. And Stacura blames that on one thing, the EPA.
It's not just us, it's becoming a regulation nation. At one point in time, coal mining was fun. It's not so much fun anymore.
Stacura says forcing power plants to reduce the amount of coal they burn has a domino effect.
They get cut back, we get cut back. I've got 350 outside trucks that come in here per day, outside contractors. So that's outside jobs. We get affected, they'll be affected.
Gary Gentry is the Knox County Development Corporation president. He says there are 9 counties in southwest Indiana with coal deposits that have been mined.
In this county, mining is the second highest paying job category that we have, second only to utilities, which of course the coal supplies most of the power source for those utility companies, so it's integral to our economy.
Gentry says he understands there could be benefits to the climate and to air quality if EPA regulations go into effect, but he worries about the impact on utility costs and jobs. That impact, economist Timothy Slaper says, is impossible to know.
That's the $64,000 question, or maybe $64 billion question, because I don't think anybody really knows.
But Slaper says the EPA regulations aren't the only thing to blame. Free market factors such as the cost of natural gas also play a major role. Natural gas prices have plummeted in recent years as fracking is opening up a large supply of natural gas. In the meantime, coal prices have increased. That means more power plants, including several in Indiana, are switching to natural gas.
If that is a huge trend, and we have fertilizer plants that are using it as a feedstock, and if we are planning on exporting it to Japan in ships, suddenly it's not going to be $4 a thousand cubic feet for gas. It's going to be, closer to 6, closer to 7, closer to that break-even point where, maybe gas isn't that much less expensive, all things considered, than coal.
In the meantime, power plants are still being forced to cut their emissions. And in the short term, the easiest way to do that is to burn less coal. While some companies like Solar Sources Underground are looking at shipping more coal overseas to make up that difference, the drop in demand could still have an impact on a large range of workers, from those working in the power plants to the miners who are on, or in some cases, in the ground.
Coal ash is one of the main byproducts of burning coal. Power companies usually store it on site in large ponds and pits, but its storage is largely unregulated. In 2007 and again in 2008, 30 million gallons of water and coal ash spilled into the White River when levees at the Indianapolis Power and Light Eagle Valley station failed.
People say, so what? Tell that to the people who live right downstream here, who probably fish in this river. 30 million gallons of toxic coal ash, that's poisoning the river, that's poisoning the fish that live here, and poisons people who eat it.
At the Duke Energy Gibson plant in the southern part of the state, there was no breach. Instead, the contamination happened over time as coal ash that was stored in a massive unlined pit at the Duke plant leached into the water table.
Several of their surface impoundments were leaching boron from them and were impacting drinking water wells nearby.
Wayne Burns' mother and father lived across from the plant in the neighborhood of East Mount Carmel for a decade.
When we started out, the water was crystal clear, beautiful drinking water. I mean, tastes really, really, really good. Some of the best water in the county. When the power plant came in, it gradually started becoming worse. You could smell a little bit of it, and then it got to where it smelled like rotten eggs, and the water would actually turn brownish, and at the last it started turning black.
In response, Duke Energy began supplying the residents of East Mount Carmel with bottled water. Eventually, the company paid to build a water line from a nearby town to supply the neighborhood with clean drinking water. But Burns thinks the damage was already done. His mother died of kidney failure and his father shortly after of cancer. Burns says Duke admitted the coal ash basin near his mother's house was unlined. He tried to sue Duke to get the company to line the basins and conduct more testing, but was unsuccessful.
You know, they have so many lawyers and they have so many politicians and whatever that backs them, and I don't think that just the average person can do anything about it. Matter of fact, I just about gave up.
Duke officials say they recently performed an internal survey of their ash basins and are taking steps to deal with coal ash in a safer way, like converting to dry handling.
That is the method that we are converting to across our Indiana system. When your ash is dry handled, it is stored in a lined landfill. The ash basins with water are different than that.
Prodiger says Duke monitors its coal ash ponds and the surrounding groundwater and regularly checks the structural safety of its levees and dams. But dry storage pits are still susceptible to leaching from rainwater. Tracy Branham of the Indiana Geological Survey has been conducting research that shows covering coal ash impoundments or storing it underground in coal mines is actually safer.
Rainwater leaches out more than the actual groundwater does. That's what we found so far. So that sort of suggests, because a lot of people used to say, don't put it below the water table because you'll get a lot of leaching out. But we're not finding that. We're finding you get more leached out from rainwater than you get when you put it below the water table.
Branham says the key is not to store too much coal ash in one site and to find other uses for the byproduct.
That's why beneficial use is important, because the less you have to put back, the more you can beneficially use, then the better off you are.
The beneficial reuse industry recycles coal ash into things such as roofing shingles, wallboard, and concrete. The coal ash is used as a filler to make the concrete stronger.
Fly ash and cement together become a cementatious material. That in turn is the glue, is what makes concrete become hard.
Concrete used in the new section of I-69 is full of coal ash. Environmental advocates like beneficial reuse, but they say it only deals with a small amount of the millions of tons of coal ash produced every year. The Environmental Protection Agency does not designate coal ash as a hazardous material, and there is no federally designated limit for safe levels of boron in drinking water. But a recent court decision may force the EPA to develop long-awaited federal guidelines for coal ash ponds that state agencies like the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Environmental Management could enforce. But until then, the coal ash pile at the Gibson plant continues to grow, and Wayne Burns fears that not enough is being done to prevent future water contamination.
My mother and father have been drinking that for years, and which I'm not saying that's what killed my mother, but I don't think it really did her any good.
Terry Usry says his property is a lot like an island. He's surrounded on all sides by the Morgan Monroe State Forest.
We're outdoorsy people. I'm out every single day out in the forest, hiking, walking my dogs.
Usry thinks the state has an obligation to preserve the forest. State officials agree, but they have different ideas about exactly how to do that.
We look at all of the attributes that the forest provides: recreation, wildlife, environmental services. We manage with that concept in mind, that we're going to provide the most biological diversity we can. So to get that, if you let the forest all age at the same time to be what some people might consider old growth, you won't have that diversity.
In its strategic plan, the DNR's Division of Forestry lists as its #1 goal the protection of all forest resources. Seifert says cutting timber helps species distribution and tree overcrowding. Here at the Morgan Monroe State Forest, Seifert and his team are researching the effects of forest management on tree regeneration and forest sustainability. This area has been cut, and now Seifert is watching how it grows back.
On our forest here, we're actually going in and planting now. Instead of letting nature take its place, we're actually going in and planting after we harvest a site like this. And we'll go in and plant the oak species and then come in and do a little weed control. Our goal is to close the canopy quickly so that all this other regeneration that would be a competitor starts to die out from lack of sunlight.
The state's current logging policies trace their roots back to 2004, when then Governor Mitch Daniels pushed for more public agencies to fund their own budgets, including the DNR's Division of Forestry.
I think at its heart it's an economic-driven management style, in that when Governor Daniels took office, he switched the management strategy of the Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry to the position that they needed to bring in enough revenue to pay for their organization's function. So it's much more of a business model now.
Over the last decade, logging in state forests has increased 1,000%, from less than 1.5 million board feet to more than 14 million board feet in 2013. Seifert maintains that in a vast majority of the cases, the state conducts single tree selection, or cutting a tree here and a tree there.
We're only harvesting about 60% of what we're growing. So if you think about that, we're still accumulating, we're still growing bigger trees. We have really good inventory data that supports what we're doing.
But what I think people find particularly upsetting is it seems to know no boundaries.
This is the backcountry of the Yellowwood State Forest. It extends into the Morgan Monroe State Forest, and it's different than the rest of the forest. In 1981, the DNR, at then-Governor Robert Orr's request, established the backcountry as an area where people could enjoy a rugged, primitive experience. There are a number of restrictions, such as you can only access the area by foot, there are no roads, and you can't have horses. According to a DNR publication from 1981, users of these areas must exercise a great deal of caution to not disturb the natural habitat.
They're going to be a place for solitude and repose for the wilderness seeker to find what they can't find elsewhere, forests that existed as they did 150 years ago.
Although it wasn't prohibited by law, the area was never logged.
Now we have clear cutting and logging occurring in what was considered the most kind of important part of the forest.
2 years ago, loggers came in and cut about 100 acres at the southern end of the backcountry. It was unprecedented, and it's happening again now at the northern end. That despite continued protests.
Now they're taking 101 acres on the north end of the backcountry area, and they're going to cut down 1,100 trees in that. And they're saying, oh, that'll have no effect. You won't notice it. Go hiking in the southern end of the backcountry area where they did the sale last year. There's stumps all over the place. Skidder trails, a 40-foot wide gravel road across the ridge, a log landing area that you can turn a semi around in. You don't notice that when you're hiking in the woods? Of course you notice it.
According to the Forest Alliance, the state is getting less money for timber than private owners. Their data shows that in most cases, timber buyers pay about half of what they would for the same quality wood from private woodland owners. This backcountry plot went for a little more than $50,000.
In reality, you have heavy machinery going in to do the logging, you're clear cutting sections of the forest, and that can create the potential for soil erosion and a lot of other impacts on the environment, let alone removing the trees from the forest.
As he enjoys his walks through the forest, Usry says he's confronted by the logging operations, whether it's a newly marked section of spray-painted trees, leftover fragments of tree tops, or the trail marks crushed into the soil from the logging equipment.
It's always a little bit depressing to me to see, oh, there's the new section that's been marked, and all these trees I know are going to be gone a year from now, and the forest is going to be all torn up.